Our next speaker is Richard Weisberg, the Walter Florsheimer Professor of Constitutional Law at Benjamin Cardozo School of Law.
Well, I knew that there were going to be ties between my own remarks today and, like Jay Michelson, I'm only going to be able to give you a flavor, given the time constraints of the written piece, which I hope you will take a look at or maybe have already read, leaving also to our superb commentator who's coming on next the possibility of having parts of my paper that I'm not going to be able to recount brought out more in the question and answer session. I didn't necessarily think that my paper would have links to Mark Galanter's paper, but I'm staying, as many of you are, in the Helmsley Hotel here, and picked up the Gideon Bible, a text that I suppose, in common with most of you, I usually leave in the drawer. This time, given the work that we're doing here, I dutifully picked up the Gideon Bible and read through it, and it turns out, as I'm sure most of our panelists know, that the stuff about lawyers goes back to, specifically, to a kind of New Testament approach to lawyers that dovetails with the skepticism expressed in the gospel writers against Pharisees and against a certain legalistic kind of thinking, which goes to the heart of my own piece. So that, for example, in Luke chapter 10, verse 25, we have the following text, "And behold, a certain lawyer stood up and tested him," meaning Jesus, saying, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" Now, this is not a joke. This is not a joke, as we say. This is in the New Testament, yet it has really some of the roots, I think, of the anti-legalistic feeling, both in American popular culture and as reported by Mark Galanter in Lawyer Jokes per se. So a lawyer stands up and decides to test Jesus. What shall I do to inherit eternal life? Verse 26, he said to him, "What is written in the law? What is your reading of it?" So he answered and said, meaning Jesus, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You have answered rightly, do this and you will live." But he, wanting to justify himself, meaning the lawyer, said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Now that in and of itself, I think, is quite a remarkable, although not if you've, as I've been doing the last couple of months, not if you've been reading the New Testament from start to finish, but it's a little bit like that response after hearing this magnificent teaching of Jesus. First of all, the idea that, as represented in the text, a lawyer stands up and decides to test Jesus on the teaching. He then hears the teaching reiterated, but he has this, nonetheless, this urge, irresistible urge, connected to law and legalism in most of the texts of the New Testament. Luke is not the only writer, but he is the one who most often signals lawyers as, in the way they're represented, as being particularly skeptical. It's a kind of dark vision. It's an insistence, no matter what is going on within the story otherwise, it's an insistence on ferreting out more, on showing that you can't be bested, even by a great teacher, even to some extent by a miracle worker. And it is emblematic of the anti-legalism of the New Testament as a whole, that it was important for the gospel writers, it was important for St. Paul to undermine this tradition in a variety of ways, as the story is told, that negativizes, that casts in the most pejorative light the attributes of lawyers, of those who tend to reason a certain way, and especially perhaps of those who stick to the text, whose tradition it is to stick to a text as traditionally understood and is given to them, and hence to be utterly skeptical of the entire enterprise that the early Christians were bringing into play, namely something new, something radically new. What was new was not only the claims for the status of Jesus as Messiah. What was equally important to them was a new way of interpreting texts. Just as important, I describe it as a two-front war that you see particularly in St. John. Just as important as the extremely difficult enterprise of proving the divinity of Jesus, just as important was an undermining, a deformation of interpretive principles that the Jewish community, lawyers and others, were attempting to uphold that found the entire claim to be implausible. The Christian writers, and you all know this, had a certain dilemma in that they considered it important for their own enterprise, vital, to link the divinity of Jesus to the old texts, to texts that had been understood not without significant creative and remarkably brilliant interpretations of the text, but nonetheless understood in a certain way for a millennium. They tied their claims about Jesus to this older text. Their attempts to tie the new phenomenon to the older text were, to the ears of most Jews, laughably inadequate.